My high school ex tragically passed, then I got a late-night call that changed everything. You have a 15-year-old son, and he needs you now. I still remember exactly how it sounded the first time I heard his voice on the phone. My mind was off in 1,000 different directions even before I picked up. It was after dinner, and I was putting dishes in the sink, thinking about the show my wife and I might watch that night. Then my phone rang, and I answered on autopilot, hardly glancing at the unfamiliar number flashing across the screen. I figured it might be a telemarketer or something equally unremarkable. It wasn't. His voice was shaky, and I thought maybe it was a prank call. But then he said my ex's name, his mother's name, and everything in me froze. He told me she had passed away from complications due to COVID a few months ago, and before I could process the heartbreak of that news, he said something else that turned my entire life upside down. She'd never told him who his father was, but her parents had finally revealed my name, and he was calling me because it seemed that I might be his dad. The quiet shock I felt in that moment was like every muscle in my body tensed at once. I heard him say he had his grandparents' permission to call me. His grandparents. The same people who had probably hated my guts for leaving their daughter behind when I went out of state for college. I flashed back to the look on my ex's face the day we broke up, right after high school graduation. We'd parted ways because neither one of us wanted to try long distance. We were both young and eager to see what life had in store. I wanted to go far away, see new places, meet new people, and she had an entirely different plan for her future. All at once, memories flooded me. Stolen kisses in the school hallway, dancing at prom, the heartbreak in her eyes. But not once had it occurred to me that she might have been carrying my child when I left. On the phone, I must have sounded like I'd lost my ability to speak because I was completely rattled. The poor kid, my son maybe, was probably trying to gauge my reaction. I imagine he was terrified I'd lash out, or maybe that I'd call him a liar. I think I managed a few broken sentences. Wait, who are you? This has to be... I'm sorry, are you saying I'm your father? Something like that. Next thing I knew, I heard an older woman's voice and I recognized it with a jolt. My ex's mother. She spoke with careful calm, probably to keep the conversation from spiraling. She confirmed that her daughter, my high school sweetheart, found out she was pregnant after I left. She said they advised her against it because she was young, but she refused to consider not having the baby. She raised him with their help. Hearing that was like having the wind knocked out of me. It hadn't even crossed my mind in all those years that I might have left a child behind. You'd think I would have suspected something, but I'd had no contact with her and we didn't really have overlapping circles anymore. I guess it would have been easy enough for her to keep me out of that particular loop, especially if she was scared or resentful that I'd broken up with her first. Their family likely decided I was out of the picture, but now, apparently, he wanted to talk to me. The raw emotion in his voice as he asked me halting questions about who I was and what my life was like stuck with me. Then, guilt churned in my stomach like I'd swallowed a pound of lead. The woman on the phone, my ex's mom, understood my hesitation. She said they were willing to do a paternity test if I didn't believe them. She sounded almost resigned, as though she'd expected me to protest or call them liars. But she wanted me prepared for the news that would change my life in ways I couldn't imagine yet. After that phone call ended, I just sat there in my kitchen, phone still clutched in my hand, every dish in the sink forgotten. I had to remind myself to breathe. The moment I put my phone down, a wave of utter disbelief and panic took hold. I was suddenly shaking. The hours that followed were blurred. The entire night was riddled with questions and scenarios. I couldn't sleep. My mind raced. I had no idea how to explain what had just happened to my wife, because how do you tell the person you love that you might have a teenage son you never knew about, a son whose mother had died only months before from a cruel, fast-moving virus? My wife and I had been married for a few years, and we were still on the fence about ever having children. We'd talk about it sometimes, usually in a casual, half-hearted way. Neither of us was certain we wanted to bring kids into the world. Life was comfortable with just the two of us, and we'd grown used to that dynamic. Yet here I was, reeling with the knowledge that I might already be a father in my mid-30s. Would my wife be furious? Devastated? What if she accused me of lying about something? Even though I'd had no idea myself, I knew in my gut I had to tell her. But that sure as hell didn't make it any easier to figure out how to begin. I must have kept her up half the night too, tossing and turning. She kept asking me if something was wrong, but each time my mouth went dry and I said, nothing. I'm just not feeling well. At one point, she put a hand on my shoulder and quietly said, I'm here whenever you need to talk. That only made the swirling guilt in me intensify, but I simply couldn't find the words. Days passed, and each day, I grew more anxious. I avoided telling my wife because somehow part of me feared that the moment I confessed, it would become real. Maybe if I kept it to myself, I could rationalize it away. Maybe it was all a big misunderstanding and I'd never have to blow up my life. But then I reminded myself that if he was indeed my son, I was already missing more time with him, time that I'd already missed for the entirety of his life. If my ex were still alive, maybe she would have stopped him from finding me or contacting, but she wasn't here anymore, and now the pieces were falling into place. Regardless of whether I was ready, That phone call had shattered my illusions and thrust me into a new reality. Eventually, I found the courage to tell my wife. She was at the dining room table, paying bills on her laptop. My heart was hammering so hard I was sure she could hear it in my chest. I remember she glanced up from her screen, saw the look on my face, and her expression immediately went from neutral to alarmed. "What happened?" she asked gently. I sat down next to her, and I might have rambled in a chaotic mess of half-explained details. I told her about the phone call, my ex dying of COVID, the grandparents, this teenage boy who was possibly my son. I expected her to be furious, to ask me why I never told her there was a possibility I had a child out there. But my ex and I had broken up so cleanly and so completely that the possibility had never registered. We always used protection. I had no reason to suspect. She didn't yell or storm out. Her eyes were wide, but her hand came up to rest on mine. I realized she was genuinely concerned, just trying to figure out how to help me process it. That's the moment I knew I was with the right person. She took a deep breath and said, "Okay, so we'll figure out if he's yours, and if he is, then we need to figure out how we can be there for him." I felt the sweet relief of acceptance, not condemnation. She had questions, of course, about why my ex wouldn't have reached out sooner, or how the grandparents ended up telling the boy I was his father. But she didn't blame me or treat me like a pariah. The next step was obvious. Arrange for the paternity test. I called my ex's mom back, and the same determined tone carried through. "Yes, we'll get the test. Let's figure out a date and place to do this properly." Maybe it was easier for her because she had suspected I might not believe them at first, especially after the shock of the phone call. Maybe she felt some measure of vindication, knowing that after so many years, I was finally being told the truth. My wife and I braced ourselves. We talked about all the possibilities before the test results came in. I tried to imagine how different our life would be if I was a father, if this teenage boy turned out to be my own flesh and blood. He was already 15, I learned. Almost 16. He'd lived his entire life without me. If it was true, then in some sense I felt I had failed, even if I was clueless about his existence. But he seemed so eager to talk, to connect. My mind would keep jumping to the day of his birth. Where was I? Probably in a college dorm, partying, staying up late studying, living a carefree life. While across the country, the mother of my child was having a baby and forging a new life as a single mom with help from her parents. My wife was quiet for a couple days, and I worried I'd inadvertently driven a wedge between us. But she reassured me that it was just her own way of processing. She's always been more methodical, whereas I wear my heart on my sleeve and can barely function when something huge rattles me. True to form, when the test results finally arrived, she took my hand and told me we'd open them together. My heart was pounding the same way it had when I first got that call. I read the words on the lab report. I was his father. The science left no room for doubt. No chance for further denial. He was mine, and something in me cracked open. I started crying, silent tears that turned into a hoarse, strangled sob. My wife pulled me in and hugged me, stroking my hair. I managed to choke out, "I can't believe it. I can't believe I missed everything." She didn't scold me or say, "I told you so," or anything like that. She just let me cry. So, with the hard proof in hand, we called his grandparents. We told them we had the results and that, yes, I was his father. They weren't surprised. My ex's mom just said calmly, "Thank you for letting us know. I hope you'll be involved however you can." He's had a tough time losing his mom, and I felt the weight of those words. He lost his mom. This boy was probably terrified, grieving, and here he was, trying to connect with a man he'd never met. He got on the phone next, and I apologized. I told him I was sorry I'd been so stunned when he called me initially. It must have seemed like I was rejecting, but I'd just been in shock. He said it was okay, that he didn't blame me, and then he asked if it would be okay for him to call me dad. I didn't hesitate in my answer. I told him, "I'd be honored if you did." We set about making plans for an actual meet. The grandparents lived about 3 hours away, which suddenly didn't seem far at all considering we'd spent nearly 16 years apart. Meanwhile, he, my son, was texting me every day. Sometimes just a simple, "Hey dad," or "How's your day going?" Often, I'd stop whatever I was doing to read his messages. If I was at work, I'd go into the break room or my office, take a minute, and respond with more enthusiasm than I think I've ever texted anyone in my life. I found out he likes basketball. He's on his school team, a small JV squad at the local high school, and he's not a star player, but he loves the game. I told him I'm horrible at basketball, which made him laugh. Still, I asked all sorts of questions. Did he have a favorite player in the NBA? What position did he like best? He seemed happy to rattle on about it. I was giddy over every tiny detail he shared. His favorite foods, pizza and cheeseburger. His favorite band, some new group I'd never heard of. The only time I didn't know how to respond was when he told me how much he missed his mom. He didn't have to say it outright, but it slipped into everything. Like he'd text me, "Mom and I used to watch basketball together on TV," or "Mom always said I had your eye." With each mention of her, I felt a pang of regret that I'd never reached out or known what was happening. After those messages, I often just told him I was so sorry for his loss that I wished I could have known her in those last few years, known him too. My wife would read over my shoulder sometimes and point out that even if the timing was not how we wanted, The present was what mattered. He needs you now, she said. He's lost one parent. I think he's terrified of losing you too, or discovering that you don't want him. That tore me up inside. I made it my mission to prove to him that I wanted to be in his life. I wanted him to know I wouldn't turn away just because it was awkward or complicated. Finally, the weekend of our first in-person meeting arrived. I could barely concentrate the Friday before. I was obsessing over whether we should get a hotel or stay with them. Should we bring gifts, or is that too pushy? My wife, ever the pragmatist, said we'd just get a hotel nearby, take them out for dinner, and feel things out from there. She suggested maybe I bring something small for him. Nothing flashy, just a token to show I was thinking about it. I ended up getting a basketball jersey from his favorite team, something that wasn't too expensive but was still special. The drive to his grandparents' place was surreal. My wife and I talked the whole way, mostly about what might happen. Was he nervous? Would the grandparents be cold toward me? We'd had cordial phone conversations, but I remembered them as pretty protective people. They might still resent. Why hadn't I tried to contact them once upon a time? But at least they'd given their blessing for him to call me. That seemed like a sign of goodwill. When we pulled into the driveway, a neat little suburban home with a carefully tended garden, I saw him standing on the porch, arms folded, leaning on the railing. The grandparents flanked him on either side. Time slowed down. My wife squeezed my hand as I cut the ignition, and I realized my palms were sweaty. My heart hammered in my chest. We got out of the car and he bounded down the steps before I even reached the porch. He was a little taller than I expected, already nearly my height, and that's when I saw it. That crooked smile my wife always teases me about. He had it too. It was like looking in a time-traveling mirror. The resemblance hit me like a tidal wave. I could see glimpses of his mother as well. Her eyes, the shape of his face, the way his hair curled at the edges. My own face went hot, and I thought I might cry right there in front of him. But I managed to hold myself together long enough to say, "Hey, bud," before he wrapped his arms around me in a quick hug. Awkward, but earnest. I hugged him back, patting his My eyes darted to his grandparents. His grandma looked worn down by grief, but there was a small smile on her lips. His grandpa gave me a hesitant nod. I tried to convey how sorry I was in my expression, about their loss, about missing all those years. I managed something like, "Thank you for letting me come. I really appreciate it." In the living room, they had old photos of my ex lining the walls. Pictures from her college graduation, birthdays, various holiday gatherings, and of course, pictures of my son as a toddler, then as a grade schooler missing his front teeth, then in middle school. Photo after photo of milestones I'd missed. It made my heart ache. I couldn't stop scanning the images. My mind flooded with questions. Did he walk early or late? Did she read him bedtime stories? When did he lose his first tooth? How was it for her when he got sick? Did she ever suspect he might want to search for me? They showed me photos of the mother and son together, some at the beach, some at Christmas, some in the hospital when he was born. Seeing her holding that tiny baby, her face glowing with a mixture of terror and exhilaration, I felt an overwhelming sense of loss for someone I once loved deeply, in a teenage sort of way. The woman in the photos had gone on to live a life I never witnessed, all the ups and downs of motherhood, and now that chance was gone forever. I'd never be able to compare notes with or ask her how she navigated each stage of his child. I don't remember everything we talked about that first. It was a blur of details and emotions. My son was shy at first, but he answered all my questions about school and basketball. He even joked about my awkward phone demeanor, gently teasing me for going silent. We all had a small laugh. At some point, I gave him the jersey, and his eyes lit up like I'd handed him a pile of gold. That moment was huge for me. Maybe the first time in my life I felt like a parent, seeing that raw, unbridled enthusiasm. Dinner with the grandparents was surprisingly pleasant. We tiptoed around certain topics, but they were polite. The only tense moment came when I quietly asked if they ever tried to find me, considered telling me about him early. His grandpa sighed, looked down at his hands for a long moment, then admitted they wanted to at times. But my ex was adamant that I'd moved on and wouldn't want anything to do with them. She felt like I'd abandoned her, even though I didn't know she was pregnant when we split. They said my ex had been deeply hurt by the breakup. She assumed, rightly or wrongly, that I'd left because I didn't care about her. Maybe she feared my rejection. Or maybe she believed it was best for her to do this on her own. The truth was, I'd never find out exactly why she decided not to tell me. That realization stung, but I also recognized that all we could do was move forward. We stayed in a nearby hotel that night. Lying in bed, my wife and I talked about how wonderful and strange it was to see my reflection in this 15-year-old kid. She commented again on the crooked smile, how he lifts his eyebrows the same way I do when I'm listening intently. The next morning, she told me she felt a maternal tug she'd never experienced before. Seeing him, she admitted, makes me wonder about the whole parenting thing, whether we've been missing out. I nodded in agreement, 1,000 thoughts swirling in my head. Life had been so straightforward just a week ago, and now everything was in flux. That weekend ended too soon. As we stood by the car, about to leave, my son gave me another hug and, in a quiet voice, asked, "So, when can I come see you?" The grandparents nodded. We tossed around ideas. Maybe something in a month or two, once we'd all had time to digest. But as we drove away, I felt a pang of heartbreak. We hadn't even left yet, and I already missed him. Back home, my wife and I had countless discussions. If he wanted to spend more time with me, maybe we could make it a regular monthly thing. He could come visit, or I'd drive up to see him. His grandparents were older, and I worried about how they were coping. Had they fully recovered from their own grief? Could they handle a teenager by themselves, especially as he got older and faced more challenges? Were they expecting me to take on some kind of custody arrangement? Or would it be more of a visitation scenario? For a while, I wrestled with guilt, wishing I'd known about him earlier so I could have helped. I started visiting him almost every other weekend. Sometimes I'd bring him down to our place if his grandparents agreed. My wife was gracious and welcoming, always thinking of ways to make him feel at home, cooking a homemade dinner or setting up the guest room with fresh sheets, a small basket of snacks, even a new poster on the wall from his favorite basketball team. It was still surreal having this teenage presence in the house, opening the fridge and rummaging for soda while we watched a game on the couch together. I'd never had siblings, and neither had my wife, so we were both new to having a younger person in the household. Some weekends we stayed at his grandparents' place instead, and I'd drive him to practice or take him out for pizza. We started forging routines. I learned which brand of sports drink he liked, which routes were best to get to his school, what time he typically woke up on weekends. Little details that most parents take for granted in the day-to-day fabric of raising a kid. For me, each discovery felt both exhilarating and heartbreaking. Exhilarating because I was finally getting to know my son. Heartbreaking because I'd missed so much of his childhood. I tried not to pry too deeply into his grief about losing his mother, but I let him know I was always willing to listen if he wanted to talk about her. Sometimes he would open up, especially late in the evening, after the hustle of the day was over. He'd tell me little stories. How his mom used to dance around the kitchen when her favorite song came, or how she would always sneak him a bowl of ice cream when he was feeling sad. The more I learned about her, the more I felt the old stirrings of affection and regret. I felt a pang each time I realized how caring a mother she'd been and how supportive her parents were. If I'd just known. But it was no use dwelling on that. Not when this bright, funny, sweet kid still needed me now. My wife and I started talking in more serious terms about the future. Would he eventually come live with us? Should we offer? But we didn't want to rip him away from the grandparents and the home he'd known all his life. On the other hand, how much longer could they handle the stress of raising a teenager? My son never spoke of wanting to move away from them, though. He loved them, and they'd been his stable family for so long. Yet I could sense that he was curious about our life as well, what it would be like to be under the same roof, to have a father and a stepmother, so to speak, guiding him. My wife was open to it, though admittedly nervous. She confessed to me one night, "I've never been a mother. I'm still not sure how to do this." All I could do was hold her and say, "Neither of us knows. We'll figure it out." Over months, we built a routine. He'd come down during breaks, like spring break and part of summer vacation. I'd drive up on regular weekends or for his basketball games. I remember the first time I saw him play. I was unbelievably proud, clapping and cheering whenever he so much as made a pass. He wasn't the top scorer on the team, but he hustled, had good defense, and I could see the determination on his face. At one point, he scored a three-pointer, and I nearly jumped out of the bleachers. After the game, as we were walking out of the gym, he flashed me that crooked smile and said, "Thanks for coming, Dad." The simple, casual way he called me Dad made my eyes sting. I had to turn away so he wouldn't see me tearing up. That night, we talked about my ex in the past tense, discussing how proud she would have been to watch him play. He looked down at the floor and quietly said, "I wish she could have seen me tonight." I put a hand on his shoulder and answered, "She's always with you. She was there in your heart." He nodded, blinking back tears. We didn't say much after that, but the moment was profound for both of us. Over time, I also noticed a deepening warmth from his grandparents. Once they saw I wasn't going to drop off the face of the planet, they relaxed around me. His grandma, in particular, would ask about my wife, my job, my life in general, like she was catching up on the last decade and a half in big, sweeping strokes. We talked about my ex a lot, the good and the bad. They joked that she was always stubborn. That's how she ended up having a baby so young despite their misgivings. She'd insisted she could do it, and from what I gather, she really did. Their eyes lit up whenever they spoke of her fortitude. I listened, absorbing each detail as a precious link to someone I once cared for deeply, who had given me this incredible gift without me even knowing. My wife grew closer to my son too. She found ways to relate to him, whether it was teasing him about the snacks he ate, or asking him to show her a few moves on the basketball court in our driveway. She tried, and he welcomed her with a sweet openness that melted my heart. One time I came out to the driveway to see them both awkwardly dribbling a basketball, laughing at how neither could quite manage a fancy spin. A month ago, if you'd told me that was in my future, I wouldn't have believed you. Still, there were moments of friction. He'd sometimes test boundaries, typical teenage stuff. He'd stay up too late, scrolling on his phone, or he'd get moody and close himself off. It was new for me, trying to navigate fatherly discipline. My wife and I disagreed at first on how much we should intervene. I tended to want to be lenient. After all, we just met. I was terrified of making him hate me. She argued that if we were really going to be parental figures in his life, we had to be consistent. He needed structure. We eventually reached a balance with a lot of communication. If he felt overwhelmed, I made sure he knew he could talk to me. If I felt he was taking advantage of our newness, I set boundaries. Not always perfectly, but I tried. Holidays were another challenge. He wanted to do Christmas with us, but also didn't want to leave his grandparents alone. So we compromised, spending a few days at his grandparents' place and then bringing them back with us for Christmas Eve and Christmas Day. It was crowded, but it was the first time in years I felt that sense of a large family coming together. There were complications, of course, as new traditions mashed into old. The grandparents had certain ways they liked to do things, and we had ours. But we laughed through the awkwardness, and somehow it worked. As the months turned into a year, I found myself becoming more comfortable with the label of dad. It started feeling less foreign and more like a second skin. My friends and coworkers began hearing me mention my son, and at first they'd do a double take and ask if they'd heard me right. I got used to explaining the situation. Most people were astonished and supportive. A few had more intrusive questions like, how could your ex not tell you? Or, aren't you mad at her? But my anger or bitterness had faded. It was replaced by a profound sense of gratitude that, in the end, we'd found each other. The boy was no longer fatherless, and I had a chance to give him the support, guidance, and love he deserved. One of the most emotional moments came on Mother's Day. My son texted me early that telling me he missed his mom. I called him, and his voice was small and sad. He said he wanted to bring flowers to her grave but felt weird going alone. My wife and I made the drive up so we could all go together. Standing by her grave, reading her name etched into the stone, felt surreal. My ex's mom cried soft, and so did my son, wiping tears from his eyes. I kneeled down, placed a bouquet of lilies by the headstone, and whispered, "Thank you. Thank you for giving me the greatest gift of my life." Part of me wondered if she could hear me, if she'd forgive me for not being there. But I like to think she knows now, in some cosmic sense, that we're finally connected. After that, it felt like a weight had been lifted. I no longer tiptoed around the subject of his mother. We talked openly. He'd tell me stories about her jokes or how she used to chase him around the house with a broom, pretending she was a witch. And I'd share memories from when she and I were in high school, how stubborn and driven she was, how she'd thrash me in every debate in class. He seemed to love hearing those stories, almost like it pieced together the puzzle of who he was and where he came from. The conversation about whether or not he should eventually live with us popped up again once he turned 16. He was more vocal about wanting independence. The grandparents were aging, and it was getting harder for them to keep up. My wife and I had grown attached. He felt like a vital part of our family. So we came up with a plan. He'd finish out that school year with his grandparents, and then we'd see if he wanted to transfer to a school in our district. I think deep down, he was afraid of hurting his grandparents by leaving, but also curious about living in a house with a father and a stepmom, having that day-to-day involvement. We agreed to move slowly, letting him decide. The day he finally told us he wanted to come live with us for his junior year of high school, I felt tears spring to my eyes. Even though we were trying to play it cool, take your time, no pressure, my wife and I both quietly wanted him here, to be a full participant in his life. The grandparents were sad to see him go, but relieved he wouldn't be so far that he couldn't visit often. They recognized it might be best for him, especially as they got old. By then, we'd built enough trust that they believed we truly had his best interest at heart. So a few months later, we moved him in. Suddenly, the quiet household my wife and I had cultivated for years was turned upside down in the best possible way. Sports gear was strewn about, the fridge was emptied at twice the usual speed, and the house felt busier, more alive. The first night we were all under the same roof, I could tell he was a bit nervous. He'd never had to answer to a dad and a stepmom for simple things like curfew or chores. I tried to keep the mood light, reminding him I was just as new to this as he was. He teased me back, and I knew we'd be okay. Sure, we had the occasional argument. He tested boundaries, as all teenagers do. My wife and I sometimes argued about how strict to be, how to handle certain situations. But we communicated, we compromised, and slowly, we all found our footing. The first time we had a real family dinner, just the three of us, around our small dining table, laughing, passing plates of food, I realized how drastically my vision of the future had changed. A year prior, we were happily childless, uncertain if we even wanted kids. Now, I had a teenage son. We were making it work in our own, unorthodox way. Over time, his grandparents visited us frequently, staying a weekend here and there. We carved out a new extended family system that surprisingly worked. My son spent every other Sunday morning with them, or they'd drive down to watch his basketball games. They still got to be an active part of his life, and I felt a sense of immense respect and gratitude for all they had done to raise him. Without them, he might not be the caring, funny, level-headed kid he was. He started calling my wife Mom in moments of absent-minded closeness, like, "Hey Mom, can you pass the ketchup?" The first time it slipped out, I saw the shock on her face. Then she smiled so brightly, I thought she might cry on the spot. We tried not to make a big deal out of it because we knew how complicated it was for him, still grieving his biological mother. But it came naturally, a sign that he felt safe, that he felt like we were his family. We had other milestones too. His first school dance, getting his driver's permit, meeting his friends, even dealing with heartbreak when he had a crush on someone who didn't like him back. All the things I'd missed seeing from ages 0 to 15. I got a condensed crash course in those last few teenage years. I wasn't perfect. I stumbled. I said the wrong things sometimes. Or I tried too hard to be his friend when what he needed was a dad. But every mistake was a lesson in how to love him better and how to show up in a way that mattered. He turned 17 and started talking about colleges. That's when it really struck me how fast these years were zipping by. He made an offhand joke one day that he wanted to go to some out-of-state school, and he teased, "You can't get mad, Dad. You did the same thing." And I froze a bit, remembering that my decision to leave all those years ago had cut me out of his life. But he grinned, reading my mind, and said, "Don't worry, I'll keep in touch." It was a poignant, cathartic moment. I realized how far we'd come, how open and honest we could be. Time kept marching forward, and eventually he graduated from high school. Walking into the auditorium, seeing him in that cap and gown, I couldn't believe that a year or two earlier, we were strangers to each other. Now, I was the dad yelling the loudest when his name was called. I was the one who jumped up to get the best picture, tears in my eyes. My wife was beside me, cheering just as loudly. Afterward, in the swirl of hugging grandparents, taking photos and celebrating, he pulled me aside. He gave me the tightest hug he'd ever given. Then he whispered, "Thank you for everything. I'm glad you're my dad." I cried again. I realized I'd done more crying in the last couple of years than I'd done in my entire adult life combined. But it was a good kind of cry, a release of so much regret, relief, and gratitude. If my ex could see him now, I know she'd be proud. If she could see me, I hope she'd understand how much I cherished him. How deeply sorry I was that we hadn't shared these years together from the start. In time, I also learned to forgive myself. I'd had no idea that I'd fathered a child, and it wasn't my fault that I didn't raise him. But now that I knew, it was my responsibility to give him love, guidance, and stability. And I was doing my best, day by day. My wife and I often talked about how bizarre and miraculous it was that life had dealt us this card so unexpectedly, yet it ended up being exactly what we never knew we needed. She once said, "I think deep down, I always wanted a family, but I never knew how much until now." I felt the same way. By the time he was off to college, my relationship with his grandparents was close to familial. They would come for holidays or watch the house if we went on a short trip. They'd bring up old memories of my ex, telling me how proud she was that he was applying to universities. They told me that in her later years, she did think about me, maybe more than once considered contacting me, but chickened out. She worried I had my own life. The pain had healed in certain ways, but she still didn't want to open old wounds. I suppose I couldn't blame her. None of that changed the fact that I missed out on those first 15, but it strengthened my resolve to make every new year count. Eventually, he got accepted into a decent school a few hours away, ironically closer to where his grandparents lived. We joked that I'd have to relive the fatherly fear of letting a child go to college out of state, but it felt good to support him in that journey, to help him pick out dorm supplies, to shuffle through paperwork, to figure out tuition. My wife took the lead in organizing campus visits. We spent weekends touring dorms, talking about meal plans, encouraging him to follow his dreams. It was such a foreign world to me a short while back, but now it felt perfectly normal. He moved into his dorm in August of that year. My wife and I helped him carry boxes up the flights of stairs, sweat pouring down our backs in the heat. After that final box was plopped on the bed, we stood around, taking in the plain dorm room that would soon become his home away from home. He stood there looking both excited and nervous. Then he turned to me and said, "Dad, I'm gonna be okay, right?" I just nodded, patted his shoulder and reassured him, "You'll be more than okay. You're gonna be awesome. We're here for you whenever you need us." When we finally said our goodbyes, he hugged both me and my wife. We told him to call if he needed any laundry advice, a ride home, a reality check. The drive back was quiet. My wife asked if I was all right, and I said, "I'm just thinking about how it's only been a couple of years since he called me out of the blue, and now I can't imagine my life without him." She squeezed my hand and agreed. We talked about the whirlwind that led us to this moment, how his existence upended our world in the best possible way. That night, I lay awake, remembering the phone call that started it all, the sheer panic I'd felt, the disbelief, the guilt. If I could go back and tell my younger self what was waiting, I'd say, "Don't be afraid. It'll be the hardest, most emotional ride you've ever experienced, but it'll also be the best gift of your life." I'd also apologize to my ex for not being there, but ultimately, I'd thank her for making sure he had a good life, for having the courage to raise him even when she felt I'd moved on. I still have waves of sadness that she isn't here to see him flourish, but her parents once told me that in her last weeks when she was in the hospital, she told them if something happened to her, she wouldn't mind if they told him the truth about his father. Maybe she suspected that she wouldn't make it. Maybe she knew that, deep down, I wouldn't turn my back. That knowledge helps me sleep. It's like her final gift was trusting that I'd do right by our son once I finally knew he existed. And so here I am, a father, a husband, a man who learned the hardest but most rewarding lesson of his life. Sometimes what you least expect to happen is exactly what you need. I have a son. He's bright, compassionate, and resilient. He's still that kid who loves basketball, who sends me random texts about a great burger he ate or a funny meme he saw. He calls my wife Mom now and jokes about how she's better at math than I am. He calls me Dad, without hesitation, which still fills me with warmth I can't quite put into words. We speak regularly, and he visits on school breaks. We chat about life, classes, future goals. My wife and I swing between missing our day-to-day simplicity and loving the new chaos. Sometimes we wonder if we'll have a child together, or if maybe this is enough. But either way, our family feels complete in its own right, with all its complexities and quirks. Looking back on everything, I see how close I came to letting fear consume me. If I hadn't told my wife about that phone call, if I had pushed my son away or refused to believe it, I would have missed out on the most meaningful relationship of my life. It took a leap of faith, a willingness to face the unknown, to admit that we don't always control our destinies. Yet sometimes, destiny calls us on a random weekday evening, right after dinner, and tells us something that changes our entire world in a matter of minutes. I will never forget the sound of his voice that night, hesitant and hopeful, or the surge of every emotion I felt when I read the paternity test confirming he was mine, or how my wife's compassion helped me stand firm when I felt my legs might give out from under me. Each twist of this story led to a bond stronger than I ever dreamed possible. There is loss in our story too. Loss of the mother he loved, loss of the years I never got to be his dad. But from that loss, we built something new, and that something is incredible. We might not have a neat fairy tale ending, but we do have a future filled with possibilities, visits, phone calls, basketball games, family meals, laughs, and most importantly, love. So if there's a lesson in all this, it's that life will throw unimaginable surprises at you. Sometimes you discover you're a father overnight, and sometimes the thing you feared most can become the greatest source of joy and growth. Through all the tears, the awkward moments, the laughter, and the bonding, I can say with certainty, I'm his dad, and there's nothing in the world I'd trade for that title.